Hello, everyone, and welcome. Here we are here in another May NAOSH week, and also today, Cinco de Mayo. Not much celebrating going on where I can see, because we're mostly going to focus in on a very healthy and positive conversation for today. So we got a solid hour ahead of us, so let's kind of jump right into things here. My name is Marc DesRoches. As I'm sure kind of most of you are now aware, registering for it and seeing my face and name strung about. I'm a little bit cleaner shaven than I was, I think, on the original ad. But I'm a workplace consultant with the Workers' Compensation Board of Nova Scotia. My day-to-day role is to really help Nova Scotia employers improve injury prevention and return to work outcomes. But for today's purposes, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to discuss a little bit more insights into psychologically healthy and safe workplaces, a very new and emerging field that many organizations are becoming increasingly interested in. I myself am, I guess we call it a project lead on an internal group that's looking at this from WCB's perspective. We're just ourselves exploring the ways that we can support workplaces around this conversation, around this topic, to see what areas and what opportunities exist for us to really help you improve your outcomes. Now, before I begin, obviously I do have the necessary housekeeping items to go through. We're going to have a couple of polls for you to participate in. This presentation is largely going to be me doing a lot of talking, looking at the registration. I see, a handful of names, a number of names that know me and have seen me present in person, and I generally try to be very engaging when I'm in person. This is actually a first for me, doing the live webinar side of things, but we're gonna take it as we can and give you the best hour that I can possibly give to you. So we'll have these polls for you to participate in. Once they're launched, you'll have the opportunity to choose an answer, and then I'll do my best to kind of share the results back to you, and we'll get some kind of perspective on what the attendees are saying based on those questions. While I'm talking, certainly feel free to ask any questions within the control panel in the GoToWebinar side of things, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. I will note that as the number of attendees I see steadily increasing here, I think we had about 237 individuals registered. We'll see how many actually make it. But we have a large group of industries represented here. And I think this is a fantastic spectrum that we want to look at. It's not just one industry that's largely focused on this. It's really across all. And just to name what I've seen thus far, we have wholesale, education, manufacturing, healthcare, there's acute, there's long-term in there. We have, home care, I noticed as well, food services. We have government on both federal and provincial side of things. We have some first responders here, defense, construction, correctional services, fisheries, municipal groups, handful of regional communities are in here. We have utilities, retail, and also residential living. And while I did see a vast majority of some of the employer names based on the emails coming from Nova Scotia, we have some attendees coming all the way into us from across Canada, as far as Alberta, from what I could last see. So with that said, like I said, this presentation will be recorded and made available to you. There is also some resource document that's available to you as a handout in your dashboard. And we'll be also sending out links after the presentation. If you happen to have any type of technical difficulties, we have Het from our IT department at WCB standing by to help address any issues you may have. Just let us know through that chat box, and we'll do the best to be able to support you. So with that said, we're going to jump right into it. Now, today's presentation is really designed to create more awareness, and that's going to be very key to remember as we go through. I think it's very important at this front end piece to clarify that neither myself nor WCB as a whole regard ourselves as subject matter experts in this field. We've certainly looked into it, and we feel that there's an opportunity for us to be involved in this, but again, we want to go into this much like yourselves and look at all the opportunities and look at what's the best direction to go. But with that being said, we thoroughly understand its impact on injury prevention and return to work. And it's an area that we're becoming increasingly interested in. And hopefully in today's presentation, I'll be able to help explain a little bit more why, and maybe something that kind of opens up your eyes as to, hey, maybe we should be looking a bit more into this. So our agenda is really going to look about what is a psychologically healthy and safe workplace, the impacts of having one or conversely not having psychological safety at work. We're going to talk about some of the specific factors that you should be considering and what information is ultimately out there for you. And then at the end, there'll be some links, and then certainly we'll get into a bit of Q&A, and I'll do my best to be able to facilitate and answer that for you guys as we go through. But like I said, not the subject matter expert. I'm almost a tour guide, if you will, that's done a bit of my homework and is just trying to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction and have the same level of information. So I think at this stage, right off the get-go, it's very important to highlight that mental health is a component, or I guess really an outcome of a psychologically healthy and safe workplace, and not really the other way around. What is meant by this, or what I mean by this really, is that psychological health and safety in the workplace will contribute towards a positive impact to mental health, in addition to other outcomes that we're going to discuss shortly here. We hear a lot of, myself included, working with organizations across this province is, there's this expectation that, our workers, our staff members are going to check their personal lives at the door when they come in, and they're going to put their work hat on and boots and go to work. And a lot of us know that that's really not the case. And there's this stigma, and it has existed, and I think it's improving in today's society, where we're removing the stigmas around mental health and the ability to better communicate and better support these things. And today, with the number of attendees that we have, is a great example of just that. So we're going to kind of continue on here, and on the front, we're jumping a little too far ahead here, sorry. When I talk about psychological health and safety, I think it's very important to look at it from its definition. Now, not to worry, as we progress through each slide, I'm definitely not going to be reading each one word for word. If I was, I would just probably send you out the presentation. But knowing the importance of establishing a solid foundation to any topic, I think it's very important that we look at it from its definition as it sits. So when we think about psychological health, it is our ability to think, feel, behave, perform effectively in our work environments, personal lives, and society at large. Psychological safety deals with recognizing and preventing hazards and risks for injury to an employee's psychological health. And when we put these things together, a psychologically healthy and safe workplace is one that is going to work towards preventing harm, danger, or injury to an employee's psychological health due to negligent, reckless, or intentional acts. Now, I think when you think of this holistically, it feels very similar to physical safety, and these are the things that we're trying to do. Now we're shifting the narrative towards the psychological health, the mental health and well-being side of it, and that's what we're really trying to do here. So now that we have a better idea of what psychological health and safety is from a definition standpoint, let's dig a little bit deeper into it and really discuss why it's so important in today's day and age. And what I can tell you from myself personally, and I think a lot of you also see this in your own individual workplaces, is that over the last number of years, 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever you want to refer to it as, based on your own individual kind of perspectives, workplaces have taken amazing strides to improve physical safety. And we've really seen the positive outcomes like reduced injury frequencies or fewer time loss claims and an overall improved safety index in the province. The more we focus on the physical safety and the safety side of things, we know that it's going to have positive spin-offs. From our perspective at WCB, yes, certainly we'll still continue to see some claims come in, but the severity, the frequency, as I mentioned, it's being reduced. And so this is really critical, and it's a fantastic thing to see. And for those of us who are safety professionals here, it's a fantastic thing to actually be a part of. Okay, but the research is now indicating that having a psychologically safe workplace is really just as important to things like workplace injury or workplace function and productivity as having a having a physically safe workplace. So we're starting to see the other side of the coin and how the two together are so critically important into our daily lives within our workplaces. So if you're a workplace that is focused on psychological safety, you're going to help create a culture where ultimately a state of well-being exists. It's going to be a culture of trust, civility, and respect between staff. And I mean that from the perspective of up, down, top, up, down, side to side, right? And that's ultimately what we want to get. We want to build that culture, that climate where everyone understands who they are, why they're there, and there's that degree of, and I use this a lot, is that, trust and civility, right? Respect amongst our peers, to the people we report to, or the people that report below us. It's an environment where we can be ourselves without fear of negative consequences, while using our own individual skills and knowledge to help make the workplace prosper, and more importantly, make our own individual career successfully, because that's why we do these things. And I hope for a lot of us, we love to go to work, and a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today should hopefully help to influence this. I mean, when you really think about it, we spend something like a third of our lives at work. So really at a high level, wouldn't it make sense to do so in a psychologically safe place? Now, I don't know about you personally, but for me, if I can have one less negative stressor in my life, especially one that involves such a large percentage of my life, I'm going to be all for it. So we're going to give you your first question here, and we'll kind of cue this up for you. Is psychological health and safety a priority at your workplace? And what I'm interested to hear is some of the results. So things like, is it denoted in your safety policy, in your corporate statement, in your mission, your vision, your values, right? These are the areas that we want to emulate it right off the get-go, because ultimately, as leaders, you must take reasonable precautions to protect and maintain the health and safety of your staff. The laws say we have to, and most of us do it without a second thought. Now, it is about treating the psychological side of safety no differently than the physical. And I don't think I've met a workplace leader in my experience working with employers who didn't want their staff in a better overall situation, a situation where they're willing and freely able to communicate for the greater benefit of the organization as a whole. And ultimately, you want your staff to feel comfortable speaking up and sharing their ideas to help make a difference in the workplace. So as I look at some of the polling results, I see we kind of have a bit of a mixture here. We have 22% is a yes, 67% is in the kinda range, and the 16% in the not quite yet. And I think that's not surprising to me. It's still a relatively new and emerging topic, focus area. And I think in the years to come, we're going to see those not yet turn into kindas, and those kindas turn into yes, we have these things. And especially as I mentioned earlier, we remove the stigma around mental health. Organizations are going to see the direct value, and we're going to talk a lot about this later on in the presentation, around the benefits of actually employing these things. So really no surprise there with those numbers for me, from what I've ultimately saw here working around the province and being involved in this kind of area for the last 5. So let's consider the big picture of all of this. We'll talk a little bit about the numbers, the research, the business case. And again, I think most leaders have the ability and the willingness to connect with the soft side to any proposal that may be brought forward to them. But I think at the end of the day, they need to really understand the benefit. They need to really look at that return on investment for the organization. So with that said, I'm going to kind of quote off some pretty mind-boggling figures reported here by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. There's about 30% of short and long-term disability claims in Canada are attributed to mental health problems and illnesses. The total cost for mental health problems in Canada in the Canadian economy currently exceeds $51 billion annually, 20 of which results directly from work-related causes. 47% of working Canadians consider their work to be the most stressful part of daily life. mental health problems and illnesses among working adults in Canada cost employers more than $6 billion in lost productivity from things like absenteeism, presenteeism, and turnover. And really, on any given week, it's being reported that 500,000 Canadians will not go to work due to some form of a psychological health issue. Now, from my perspective at WCB, kind of looking at it from my four corners of the walls here, is when an injured worker is more concerned about the psychological or the social conditions of their workplace rather than the overall condition of their physical injury, it's generally going to lead to return to work barriers and in most cases longer claim durations. Again, what we have to appreciate from a workplace injury perspective is that we take the body as a whole when we look at most workplace injuries. And I'll speak a bit in generality with that, but we look at it from the biological, the sociological, and the psychological perspective. And if there's any areas that are influencing the progression of that particular claim, we know that it can have negative impacts. And really, it should come as no surprise to anyone on this call today that in most cases, time equals money in the disability management world. And when we go back to some of those numbers being reported by the Mental Health Commission of Canada, it makes sense to me. And I really hope it makes sense to you guys. Perfect. Okay. So, listening to the last two slides, the business case for psychological health in the workplace becomes much clearer, doesn't it? Or, at least I hope I did my best version of a used car salesman to make you believe me. But I think, like I said, looking back at the numbers, it really speaks for itself. And from the holistic perspective, from the soft side of it, I think we can all appreciate in our own individual circumstances how being in an atmosphere that looks at protecting psychological safety, we feel more confident in our day-to-day lives going to the workplace. So now the next question is, where do we go from here? And hopefully for the remainder of this time, I'm going to start to steer most of you in the right direction. So at WCB, much like other entities that look towards best practice, we consider the CSA standard for psychological health and safety, otherwise known as the national standard, to be regarded as a leading best practice in this field. So it makes sense that we're going to point employers in this direction. Now, with that said, we're not in a position where we're going to look at, when I engage with an employer, I'm not going to say, thou shalt adopt this standard. No, I'm going to point them in the direction, let them do their own research, and allow them to understand if this is a good opportunity for them, again, given that it is a leading best practice. Now, the national standard is a set of voluntary guidelines, tools, and resources intended to guide workplace in promoting mental health and preventing psychological harm. In terms of today's conversation, because for those of you who have looked at the standard, it is lofty, it is quite encompassing in what it offers to you. We're going to simply focus on the 13 factors within that standard that are known to positively impact an employee's mental health, psychological safety, participation, and productivity in the workplace. And you can see on the slide there are 13 factors. So jumping right into the first one, organizational culture. Okay. It's a common blend of norms, values, and beliefs among staff in the workplace. It generally lends itself to an environment that demonstrates trust, civility, and respect, and a degree of fairness within the workplace. It's attempting to gain a community where staff feel they are valued and leaders have their trust. Again, for those of us who have taken culture training, the most important thing that we can have is a two-way street when it comes to trust. If you have management that is always creating significant oversight over the work that you're doing as a staff member, there's a degree of distrust that exists there. And we're trying to remove that so that a leader can, a manager or supervisor can delegate responsibilities to their staff members and have faith that we've given them everything they need to be able to do that successfully, and vice versa. So some examples of trying to build this within your organization and build this kind of overall organizational culture of trust, civility, and respect is designated team building events, diversity and equity programs, conflict resolution programs, or as I mentioned previously, having a purpose or a value statement that's driven and adopted by the entire workplace. At WCB, we look to have safe and timely return to work for the employers that we work with. And that's something when I work and coach with employers, that's what we're trying to do. Internally, we have some missions here, or some values around, caring, compassion, can-do attitude, being safety champions. And these are all the things that I embody and believe in as an employee at WCB, and I buy into it. And that is the degree of effort or focus that I take when I go to employers and try to pump them up for doing the right things and moving in the right directions. So when we look at the second factor, psychological and social support is present in the workplace when coworkers and supervisors are supportive and respond as needed to the psychological and mental health concerns in the workplace. So here we go. We got question number 2. Do you provide psychological or mental health training for your supervisors? Or have you participated within your workplace? And what we find is a workplace that helps to remove the stigma related to mental health and puts processes in place to recognize when a staff member is in distress, it helps to ensure an overall healthy environment. And it goes back to that original factor that we're building that trust amongst the individuals within our organization. Some examples of supporting this would include employee family assistance programs. I know that we have some very highly educated, highly trained frontline and first responders here. So things like programs like trauma response, they're going to be critical mechanisms for traumatic events or acute instances where we need to debrief and get back to a degree of normality that exists in building that resiliency. And there's also a number of training programs to help supervisors respond to mental health concerns as well. So as I look to some of the poll results here, again, it's kind of almost a 50-50 split between we kind of have it and no, we don't, and with a 16% showing that, yes, we do have this in place. And what I've noticed in working with other jurisdictions is there's a lot of different training that's out there, and employers generally don't necessarily know where to go. And that's why looking at it from the perspective of from the top down of more of a program basis, it can really help to identify where we want to go, as opposed to simply jumping into a training program and then realizing maybe it wasn't the right fit for the first place. Building a systematic plan or a systematic approach to be able to target where we want to go with this, and then building the support mechanisms as a foundational piece is where we ultimately want to see employers progress with this. But at the end of the day, I respect any employer that makes any commitment to their workplace by having their supervisors trained on any number of things, and especially in the world of psychological and mental health training. So good to see that close to half have some degree of this and are looking to improve upon it. So back to the next factor, clear leadership and expectations. It's going to be present in our workplace when leaders, so more focused on managers or supervisors, provide adequate support to staff on what to do and what's expected of them, or what changes will affect them on their day-to-day lives. Effective leadership helps increase morale, resiliency, and trust, while at the same time helping to decrease frustration and conflict in the workplace. When we talk about outcomes, it's going to help to improve the health of staff, and we can look at that through trackable measures like presenteeism and absenteeism. And really, when we think of the big picture, it's really going to help the organizational health through things like productivity, quality, inputs. Those are the things that we want to see from the big picture as well, too. Some examples I would encourage employers to include are clear job descriptions or thorough orientation processes, job performance feedback, or regular communication between leadership and staff. You know, our organization went through a transformation, or has been going through a transformation over the last number of years, and our leadership team has been very clear in terms of directing us where we're going and giving us a roadmap for the changes that we're looking to make, and where opportunities exist, they're soliciting our feedback and doubling back to say how it's been used or not relative to the direction that we're going. So I think these are all great things. I know working with a handful of employers, they're getting actually very clear and crisp on their job descriptions. So when a staff member comes in, it's not what I read in paper does not match up what I'm seeing once I actually get out on the shop floor, if you will. So they're trying to really pair the two together so that it's very clear for staff members up front. And then we remove that degree of stress that exists from going first day behind the desk reading the paper through orientation through to first day on the shop floor realizing it's nothing that maybe I was led to believe through a job ad, through the orientation process, through my initial training. Key one that I like a lot, I mentioned already, is civility and respect. It's going to be present in the workplace when staff are considerate in how they interact with one another. It's about demonstrating care and consideration while also extending the same to your clients and customers. Because again, for a lot of us on here, and I see looking at some of the sectors, we are very much going to be publicly faced. And so the way that we feel about ourselves and the way that we feel that we can interact with those individuals are going to emulate a positive perspective for what our organization is as we face ourselves externally. Having a civil and respectful workplace is generally related to greater job satisfactions and attitudes. It's going to give a perception of fairness and relationships that help create an overall positive work atmosphere. Ways to support this are respectful workplace policies, conflict resolution processes, diversity and inclusion training, or having policies around violence or harassment or bullying. You know, when I work with employers, I like to talk about policies as being a foundation, but in a lot of places, I consider it to be preventative processes. Yes, understandably, having these systems in place are going to support post-event follow-up, if you will. But for the most part, what we're trying to do, especially with the front-end communication and training, is that we're trying to establish a degree of norms or positive norms up front with our staff members to say, hey, these are the expectations, again, going back to a previous factor, and this is what we're looking to do. And when we build in the civility and respect component on it with a variety of policies and processes, like I mentioned a second ago, we want to see that resonate in a positive work atmosphere. Psychological demands will really look to connect the worker's cognitive abilities to the demands of the job, really to help lower things like depression, increase self-esteem, and create a more positive self-concept. What we're trying to say here is that most staff will not only have, and I guess really in most cases, when you hire a staff member, you know right from their resume and from their interview that they're generally going to have the appropriate knowledge, skills, and abilities to do the job. But what we also want to ensure is that they have the psychological and emotional intelligence to do it. Now, organizations can support this through job demands that include psychological demands included on them, and not just the physical, or through fitness to work reports to ensure the worker could safely perform the job or task. Now, I might be a little biased here when it comes to job demands analysis, because I think it really is going to be crucial when we look at positive return to work outcomes. But I think at the front end, on the training and hiring process, on that HR side of it, it is really going to help support ensuring we have the right person for the right job. And once that person is in the job, it's ideally going to help work to prevent any type of injury, be it physical or psychological, right off the get-go. Growth and development works to support an employee's development. There you go. First one, answer within the answer. Encourages them to enhance their competencies and prepares them for future positions. This factor fosters an environment where staff will work to increase their individual goals as well as the organization's goals, leading to increased job satisfaction. When we combine this with something like performance planning, along with apprenticeship programs or on-the-job training or mentorship programs, are all great ways to foster growth within your organization. I've personally worked with many organizations that are very, very keen that whenever possible, they create opportunities to cross-train. Now, in my world, a lot of it kind of revolves around creating opportunities that if the worker is injured, then we have an opportunity to put them in some type of transitional work so the worker loses no time, and we provide them with meaningful work. But I think when we look at it from the perspective of psychologically safe workplaces, we want to ensure that we're giving the necessary skills and information to the worker, and we ensure that we're passing down that corporate knowledge from our tenured staff to our newer staff so that we can ingrain that that perspective that we want to see our organization. Again, going back to our purpose, our mission, our values, we're all connecting these things together. And that's where, if we look at it from the growth and development side of things, the more that we can create these degree of norms and look at it from a perspective that we want you, we want to retain you, we want to grow you through our organization, is going to have positive outcomes for the organization, but very much so for that worker, because they're going to feel very valued within the process. And this leads us kind of nicely into recognition and reward. This factor really looks to motivate employees. We want to build their self-esteem, and we want to encourage their desire to excel or exceed expectations within the workplace. I was asked to do this presentation for Health and Safety Week, and maybe I could have said no to my manager and he wouldn't mind. I know he's on the call right now. But with that being said, I wanted to do this because not only do I see or potentially get some type of acknowledgement for doing this, but for me, I actually see the internal reward and the motivation for sharing this information that I know maybe a little bit more than some of you, and bringing you up to what I know, and we can all work together to increase our knowledge as we go forward. And so within this factor, it provides staff with more energy and enthusiasm in their work. It's likely spin off into how we treat our coworkers and our customers. And that's really what we want. If we have that positive atmosphere because of how rewarding we feel our positions to be, we undoubtedly will have positive reactions for those around us in our kind of immediate circle. Now, we can achieve this recognition award directly through things like Working Safely Awards or monthly worker recognition or newsletters. But, and most of you know your staff members or who you work with, some people don't like that public displays of affection. Personally, I don't. I kind of like the quick little text message, hey, good work, whatever the case may be. That's who I am. And so in those cases, they can be done privately through one-on-one acknowledgements, or simply having it as standing agenda items within your performance reviews. So when we talk about the involvement piece, and I kind of touched on it a little bit a couple slides ago, it exists when staff feel they have the ability to provide input into the work they do, which results in better engagement, morale, and provide pride in their workplace. If a staff member believes they have meaningful input into the work that they do, they're more likely to be engaged and show more pride in the workplace. So again, we're using a lot of the same terminology throughout these slides for these factors, but it demonstrates just how interconnected they are. Now, as an organization, obviously you have a direction that you want to go. Each particular position, you know what you're looking out of it. But if you provide them with guardrails, it still allows a staff member to be involved in the process and have some autonomy, have some wiggle room within it, but knowing that they're still going to move in the direction that you want them to. So ways that we could facilitate this would be through joint worker management committees. And I mean this beyond just your typical legislated, safety rep or JOSH committee, Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee. And we're looking to create opportunities. So I'll give you one example of an organization that I've worked with, and they had what was referred to an ideas committee. And they met once every couple of months, once a quarter, and it was a cross section of the organization. They basically had someone from each department and each different layer of management. And this group of individuals would come together and they would discuss anything and everything under the sun that they felt could improve the culture, the atmosphere, the output, the production, you name it, of the organization. And that information would be documented, reported, shared, and it was a way to get that direct engagement and involvement, and staff would be able to see how their input was influencing the direction that the organization was going. We could also consider it through worker consultation on change. I mentioned previously about the transformation of WCB and how our executive team was in constant consultation. We had a committee looking at a lot of this and making sure that we were communicating back to staff members. Or even it can be as simple as we need to make new safe work procedures. Why not obviously use your safety committee, your safety rep, as well as your HR, your safety person, but why not grab someone from the floor that does that job every single day? Let them be involved in what that safe work procedure would look like. There's lots of great opportunities that exist. Workload management, I think, is fairly straightforward factor devoted to ensuring tasks and responsibilities can be completed within the time available. What we don't want to have is a worker in a situation that no matter how good their performance is, the outcome will not be achieved. I think that most staff are willing to work hard and consider a good day's work as being fulfilling and rewarding. However, when they have an excess workload without any degree of control, it can directly result in physical, psychological, and emotional fatigue. These negative stressors. Now, this is an area that I'm trying to learn more on myself, but there is a spectrum or a curve that exists within positive and negative stress. Too little of workload can have negative stress, too much can have negative stress, and there's really that kind of Goldilocks right in the middle phase. And I think it's very important for employers to really consider this. And going back to that involvement and building the autonomy, when you link these together, you can actually create a really positive outcome for your workers that's going to have direct spin-offs in a number of different things, including the presenteeism, the production, the quality, all of these things. So ways that we can look at this and control it is through reasonable work distribution, overtime maximums, or progressive workloading for new hires. And what I mean by that is don't jump a brand new staff member into work that a 20-year veteran is doing. Bring them on piece by piece with maybe some of the low tolerance, low risk positions, build their confidence within the job, build their confidence being in that workplace on a day-to-day. And as they become not complacent, but become positive in terms of how they're doing those jobs and the outputs, then add more on and continue to layer on. In the return to work world, we kind of consider it almost as ramping. And so that we're not putting too much load too early and creating a negative outcome. What we want to do is slowly progress them into a workload, present those opportunities for mentorship or peer training, and get them moving in the right direction in a safe and very much manageable way. Engagement, this factor is going to exist when staff feel the connection to their workplace and the work that they do. This factor has a strong linkage back to helping define a positive culture in the workplace, which leads to positive outcomes for the workplace. These positives can include improve productivity, quality, and reduce turnover. And I kind of already mentioned a couple times when we talk about the mission, the purpose, or your value statements as an organization, if they're created, supported, mirrored by staff, going back to the original factor, you're building that organizational culture right there. You're building those commitments where people are engaged and they see the benefit of coming every day and doing the work they want to do and seeing the outcomes that the organization is producing, and they feel that they're a part of that. Balance is kind of that age-old saying of, finding that work-life balance. Workplaces who can successfully accomplish this will help to create a healthy equilibrium to reduce the unnecessary stress and possibility that home issues may creep into the workplace or the other way around. Like I said earlier, we don't check that mental health hat at the door. What affected me when I dropped my 3 kids off at 2 different places this morning and the chaos that existed could very easily come into the workplace. And then if I'm met in the workplace with significant stressors or an unpsychologically safe environment, then we're hitting, kind of that perfect storm condition. And so what we ultimately want to see is really the flexibility to accomplish our tasks and do the things in our daily lives, whether it's work or personal related, and have that ability, that autonomy. Workplaces can really support this balance through flex work shifts, job sharing, specific work-life balance programs that exist. And I think it's something, and for those of you who can see me on the camera here, working out of my home office here, is that we're seeing a lot of remote work over the last couple of years with the pandemic, and a lot of organizations are seeing the added benefit. And I can tell you myself, having 1 or 2 less drives into Halifax every day has actually seen a lot of positive benefits for my own personal mental health, and I applaud my organization for taking those steps. And like I said, many others, but those aren't the only ones, right? There are many other options that exist, and we always encourage you to kind of look deeper into that, to what opportunities exist for you and your organization. So our 12th factor is psychological protection in the workplace. And it's simply the ability to communicate, really, if I pare it down, the good, the bad, the ugly, without a fear of negative consequences for doing so. So this is going to lead us to our final question for the presentation. And I want to ask you, does your organization offer any type of mental health or psychological training for staff members? When we see psychological protection in the workplace, it's likely going to result in greater job satisfaction, team dynamics, improved performance. Typically, workplaces will experience fewer conflicts or grievances when workplaces are actively working to prevent psychological harm to staff. Things like harassment and violence training or mental health awareness training are great ways to establish positive norms in the workplace. And there's many others. There are certainly many others, and we'll talk a bit more about that at the end. And as I look at the polls here, I can see, again, it's fairly similar. There's over 50% are indicating, no, we don't have that at this point in time. 37% are saying, yes, we do to a degree, and we want to find ways to improve on it. And then the last 11% is yes, we do have it, and I applaud you guys for having those things. And there's many opportunities, through paid training, through certificated training, or through, free online training that exists out there. So again, I encourage you to do your research on this, and we do have some links that will hopefully start to steer you in the right direction. Our final factor is physical protection, and really I like to end on this one, even though it is the 13th in the standard, in that I hope it's really a fairly easy one to accomplish. But it's ultimately when staff feel physically protected at work because their leadership team and all the way down through took the appropriate action to prevent harm and provide the necessary trainings for staff to act safe. I can't even speak now. The necessary training for staff to act safely. A workplace that is perceived as being safe can help to increase communication, retention, and engagement. We can leverage this, and there's many ways we can leverage this, but through things like having well-established safety programs, hazard control processes, the appropriate safety training that goes along with these programs or processes or procedures, or adopting wellness programs. These are great examples of this approach, but like I said, there are certainly many more. So, albeit that was a quick synopsis of the 13 factors in a nutshell, there is obviously much more information for you to explore. There's much more information for me to explore as we continue to look on WCB's side. Where do we ultimately go with this? So where does this lead you? Where does it lead us? And really that question is for you and your workplace to decide. But today, we have certainly discussed there are clear benefits to learning more and determining how a psychologically healthy and safe workplace program can be a good fit for your organization. In today's webinar, I have shared the business case or the benefits or the return on investment for establishing a psychologically healthy and safe workplace program, or, just at a minimum, dipping our toes into it and just creating a little bit more of internal awareness on it. So if I can kind of recap in a condensed way, from an HR perspective, it'll help improve hiring, training, promoting, and redeploying staff. From an OHS perspective, it's going to help improve safety communication, hazard identification, reporting, and due diligence. From a return to work perspective, it's going to help to build trust, respect, and a desire to seek positive injury outcomes. And then finally, as you've heard through a lot of the factors, there's a strong linkage back to improved productivity outcomes. And I think most of you would agree that your finance or your operations people love that last bullet. I get that they love the soft side of it and the added benefit around the people, but their positions ultimately revolve around a lot of the bottom line of the organization. And when we can pair this back to the direct business case and return on investment, that's where they become very much involved. So to close out, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, not myself nor WCB are here to be a subject matter expert in this field. But I can say that we've done our research and we believe more workplaces need to be aware of what opportunities exist for creating a psychologically safe workplace. We at WCB have established some basic resources to help get you started. And on the next slide, there'll be some links, including a link to our psychologically health and safe hub on WorkSafe for Life, as well as some external links to education programs and training. Again, all things largely to help you get started. So the next step for you is to go back and engage in your workplace in these conversations. Consider what steps you want to take to begin establishing a psychologically healthy and safe workplace. So to that end, I really want to thank everyone for joining me today. It looks like we had a great turnout looking at the numbers. It's been my absolute pleasure to share this information with you. And I really look forward to learning how your individual workplaces will adopt these principles into the future. So to that end, we're going to kind of shift gear, and I think we have some questions ready for us. So maybe I'll kind of pass over to Nicole, who's moderating, to kind of share some of those with me, and I'll see what I can do to answer for you guys.
Hi, Mark. So we've got a few questions from a few different folks, and I want to start with one from Matt, who says, embedding a brand new management system is a lofty task. Do you have any recommendations on how to approach that?
Yeah, it's like any system, right? It takes work. But what I can leave you with, and this comes from me from having spoke with a number of workplaces that have adopted the national standard. I spoke with a couple who actually participated on the pilot back in 2010 through 2013 before it was officially finalized. But what they had identified and what they advised me of is that you probably already have 50 to 60% of the work already done. It's just a matter of aligning it, because a lot of the stuff within the factors is about creating policies, processes, and systems that may exist. And I talked about a few slides ago, there may be stuff that exists in the HR side of the business and the OHS or in the ops side of it. And really it's a matter of looking at these factors, looking at the system, following it and saying, okay, what can we bring together? And really, like any type of a project, it starts with a commitment from the top down. If the top is bought into it and you have the right people involved in a committee, you can build a plan that will be successful. And as you kind of roll that out with the right people, and again, with that top-down measure, you're going to build that sustainability right off the get-go as you look to embed it into existing systems. It's kind of the old saying of, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. And that's largely with big systems like this, is you start with a commitment from the top, you build a team, and then you build a plan and you work that plan to success.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So we had a couple of questions around OHS legislation from Kim and Gary, and I'll just try to summarize what they're both asking is, do we anticipate any changes to the OHS legislation in Nova Scotia around psychological health and safety? And what is your thought about our legislative framework? Do you think we support or nurture and require businesses to improve psychological health and safety at work?
I think that's a fantastic question, actually, because I know that it's a very active conversation across many jurisdictions in Canada here, but in the province, I know that our friends over at Labor Skills and Immigration, they are looking at this right now. There's going to be obviously some changes coming to our violence prevention in the workplace legislation. There's going to be, I'm assuming with the process, there's going to be a lot of stakeholder engagement with the public to determine what changes need to be made. We're going to obviously do our jurisdictional scan, do our due diligence, and ensure that we're in line with what's being done across Canada. So as far as where we're going with it, I'm not entirely sure. I think we're eventually going to shift, that there is going to be a degree of involvement. What that looks like, I mean, maybe it could be like when you look at, our safety regulations. You have a hazard to your feet, right? The legislation points you to, say, the CSA standard, and maybe that's where we ultimately go, and that's what becomes that standard, is what is identified as the baseline compliance measure within the legislation. Again, not being directly involved with it, it's difficult for me to say, but I would like to say that it would be nice to see it go in that direction. As far as every organization being able to adopt it as a mandatory standard, again, I leave that to the powers to be who make the decisions in the province. But again, thinking big picture here, I wouldn't, knowing what I know now about it, it would be great to see, but I think we need to take it, one step at a time, and we need to make the necessary legislative changes. We need to consult with the public and ensure that again, what we're doing and the decisions made reflect the direction that, our province and largely across Canada want to go as we create continuity in this area. Thank you for that question, by the way.
We had a question from Cindy who asks, will the WCB help organizations implement the national standard?
So the short answer to that is no. Like I mentioned, we're not the subject matter experts. Certainly there's training that exists that you can take out there to look to adopt it. We, myself included, we're more of a tour guide helping steer employers in the right direction. But with that said, there's a ton of external resources and programs that are designed for internal adoption. So I'd encourage you to start with the information available on Mental Health Commission of Canada and kind of branch out from there. Because there is a lot of content, I do recommend kind of leveraging what's under the Mental Health Commission of Canada, what's under that umbrella. But what I can certainly tell you, again, having seen some employers who have adopted this and looking at some of the programs, free programs, I might add, that are available to you, a lot of the tools are actually built into it that will allow. It doesn't take someone with specific training to help. I think it certainly does help the process, but it's not an absolute requirement. And so, like I said, I think doing your own due diligence, learning about some of the systems and the programs that exist out there, you'll find that there are great opportunities for you to actually take this and lead this internally. That said, my role, the workplace consultants, we're excellent facilitators, and if we're already engaged coaching an employer on injury prevention and return to work, and this is an area that we want to go down, we will help support and facilitate the committee, but ultimately it's going to be the committee or the organization that's going to be the ones adopting this. So thank you. That's a very good question, and from our perspective in terms of involvement.
Great, thanks, Mark. So we have a comment from Joe who says that he did the CPHSA course with the Canadian Mental Health Association, and he had to go to Newfoundland for it, but he said it was well worth it. So off of that, we had another question about what training you would recommend organizations start with for their staff.
During the presentation, I kind of mentioned a few general options. At WCB, we're always kind of caught in this position that there's a ton of really good service providers that exist in this province and others. And we certainly don't want to put ourselves in a conflict of interest of say, promoting one over the other. That said, there is a lot of stuff that does exist in the free realm. And again, I kind of mentioned already, the Mental Health Commission of Canada is a great free resource to move you in the right direction. And yes, it will, granted, kind of point you in some training courses that require fees attached to them. But, there's things like mental health first aid that's designed to help recognize the signs of mental health crisis and provide the necessary supports. The Working Mind there's a version for employees and supervisors that looks at the mental health continuum and that gives the necessary tools to kind of conduct that own self-check of our own mental health. It's something in WCB, that's what we do. There's also mindful employee training for psychological health that just helps to create that kind of baseline foundational training. But like I said, at this time, WCB is not in a position to say, go here or go there. We do have some links to, like I said, to some free resourcing that we consider to be well-rounded. Again, it falls under that Mental Health Commission of Canada umbrella. But from a WCB perspective, like this presentation, it's largely going to be geared around awareness and not specific employer training where you necessarily get a certificate. So, without highlighting every single opportunity out there, I'd encourage you to get behind your internet browser search bar and do your own research. Like I said, the Mental Health Commission of Canada, it's an area that I commonly come back to help steer me in the right direction. And if I know that a program or training or service has some degree of arm's length or direct linkage back to that, I know that it's going to be credible. I know that it's going to
audio. I had a couple of questions from folks asking if the presentation is going to be available to download after, and it will be. We'll certainly share that with you, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel, a recording of the webinar. Mark, do you want to try again?
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me now?
There we go. We got you back. Okay, so perfect.
Where did you lose me? I see a couple people texting me now. So maybe someone can kind of chime in where I dropped off.
No, we heard the conclusion to your last question, so all good there. We have a couple of the new ones we'll try to get to. So the first is from Magdalena, who's asking if you can recommend a direction on where you might go to find additional supports and approaches to support workers through times of intense work. So if, for example, they're dealing with crisis or in a wave of intensive work demand.
I think, again, I would look towards, the Mental Health Commission of Canada. It's going to look at that particular factor and it's going to give direct linkage to you. I would also, another free resource is Guarding Minds at Work. If you go on to those specific factors around intense workload or creating workload management, those areas, it's actually going to give a lot of tools for you as an employer to be able to focus on that specific area and look towards, okay, we know, hey, you know what, this time of the year is the busy time, we're fully staffed, the clients expect ABC out of us. Look at it from the preventative perspective, know that we're getting to that point of increased productivity, increased focus, increased workload, and put in the necessary preventative protocols up front so that, again, I talk a lot about creating a positive foundation. Put those things out front. And I would say those would be two kind of really good areas to start with, because they're actually going to branch you off in a few different areas that I think will put you in the right direction. And without specifically answering it, I think I'll call it a vague answer that will get you very much started on the right direction for workload management.
Great, thank you. So we'll take one more question. We are coming to the end of our time here together, but as you can see, Mark's contact information is on the screen, and he would invite you all to reach out to him if you've got any follow-up questions or comments after the session. So the last one is from Kim, who started with a comment about how employers should be separating their mental health strategy from their psychological health and safety strategy. And she is asking Mark, what is the biggest change that you would hope a psychological health and safety policy would achieve? What would have the biggest impact in an organization?
I think it goes back to one of the factors that exist there. It's around that engagement. It's around demonstrating to your organization that we're making a commitment to the workers, and that's throughout the organization. That's not just those that are doing the job on the front line every day. What we're trying to do is create a positive culture where there's a direct commitment to the people we bring in every single day and issue a paycheck every other Thursday too. And so when we talk about creating psychological policy, psychological platform, ideally the systems, the processes, the programs that we build into that is ideally going to help with the mental health side of things as well too. Now, that being said, to your point, we can also have direct supports given directly to mental health. So EFAP is a prime example of that you can incorporate that and build that into the overarching psychologically health and safe workplace process or program, but it can also be a standalone item that you support your organizations with. And we know a lot of organizations that don't necessarily have a PHSW, but they have EFAP. And that's one way that they can be able to directly support the mental health of their workplaces. In a lot of cases, providing them that kind of anonymous or that direct counseling they may need. But I think going back to your question is if we do the stuff up front, ideally that process is going to demonstrate a commitment to our staff members, and the spinoff is going to be a lot of the things that we talked about today, and mental health is going to be one of those positive outcomes.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time today.
All right. Everybody enjoy the rest of their Safety and Health Week. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.